So I was born in Lawton, Oklahoma, to my two parents, Christina and Brandon Moralez. My amazing family is right there in this front row, in front of our lovely softball team. And some of you guys might know my dad. He is back there. He has the little dog with him all the time.
Wave at his dad. There he is.
They celebrated their 20th marriage this past weekend, I think it was. I moved to the city whenever I was a young girl, and I ended up graduating from Norman North. For majority of my life, the past 18 years, I've played softball. It really means a lot to me, and it's been a huge part of my life on the ups and downs. So.
Yeah, cool. Well, you mentioned that you play softball. That's what you're doing here at SCU. So tell us, at what point in your life did softball become something that you fell in love with? When did it become important to you?
So softball has always been important to me because I came from a really athletic family. I started playing on a national team whenever I was about 13 years old. And so that consisted of a lot of traveling. My main team wasn't from here. They were based out of Houston. And then I spent a lot of time playing in the Oklahoma orgs. And so softball became something that it started to affect my life because, I had softball in every weekend. And so I was like, okay, well, this means that I can't go to church. And on the weekends that I had off, it was like, oh, well, this is my off weekend. I still can't go to church. So I never really made time for it. And whenever I didn't make time for it, that's whenever I started seeing that I was going down the wrong path in my life.
So you're playing softball, you're starting to sacrifice your time with the Lord for your sport. Does anyone know what that feels like? Or just for the things that you enjoy to do, like the passions in your life? I think one of the things that we talk about, one of my cousins likes to say that the way that he spells love is T-I-M-E. So you think about the time that you spend with someone. So if we say that we love the Lord, what type of time are we spending? So Jess, you're going through this in your life. You're seeing that this isn't happening for you. At what point did that start to change? At what point did you start to be like, I need to spend some time with the Lord?
So I really started struggling with my identity as a whole. And I have some notes here. I had a really mental and physical abusive relationship with my high school coaches that ended up making me transfer schools my senior year. And so that was something that was really hard on me. Most days I was depressed. I felt alone. I felt like I had nobody. I couldn't look myself in the mirror. It was a really hard thing, and I think a lot of people in this room can relate to that. And so, I started failing in everything that I did. I was lost. And so I think that something that changed me the biggest was my dad became a coach here in 2019. And I was able to have the relationship with Coach Kent Williams, get to know Joe Blackwell and all the faculty here. And this place just felt like home. Before I decided to come here, I was supposed to go to the University of Houston and play softball there. And it wasn't until I came to a preview day here because my dad was like, you just need to come. And I told him, I was like, I'm never going to SCU. And and I came to a preview day here, and 2 weeks later I ended up signing my letter of intent. And I think one of the best things is that I didn't have this, but God has had this planned. And so that's when it really started to change, whenever I got involved here at SCU, knowing that I had the faculty and my friends to be able to support me and want to have this relationship with God.
That's great. Well, Jess and I have had some conversations. One of the things that we talked about is something that you went through with your family, specifically your father, that was really made a big imprint on not just you, but also your family's life. Do you want to share that with the students, what that was?
So my dad was a double transplant in 2006. A double transplant is he had a new kidney and a new pancreas. It was one of the biggest blessings. And I was super young. And so I didn't really understand much of it. He was transplanted in Houston, Texas. At the time, we were still living in Lawton. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. So at about, I believe it was around 2017, I was in high school, and he ended up getting really sick. And we didn't really know exactly what was wrong, but they told us he is in renal failure again. He's going to need another transplant. And so as time passed, he continued to get sicker and sicker. And this was leading up to the point that Coach Kent came into our lives just randomly. There was no intent. My dad coached at Oklahoma Christian for a really long time, and SCU, honestly, we didn't even know this was a college. And so Coach Kent just showed up one day in our lives, and it was at a really great time. So we were lost as an entire family, and then he ended up coming here, and through coaching and a little bit after COVID, he just continued to get worse. He was on full dialysis, hemodialysis, so he had a lot of ports in his arms. He would run that every single day of the week, and me and my mom were the ones that helped connect him and disconnect him because he did it at home. And so seeing my dad in and out of the hospital and in that condition is one of the worst things that I think anybody can go through. And so it was really hard. And this is where it gets pretty great. So after COVID, he goes to the doctor, and they're like, "We're sorry, and we hate to tell you this, but you have a year left to live." And
Say that one more time.
I said, "We're sorry to tell you guys, but you have a year left to live."
And what year was this?
This was right after COVID, so kind of beginning of 2021. And they're like, "The only chance that you have in living is if you can find a living donor." Well, the closest thing that is going to be to being a match is your daughter. Well, I was ruled out of that because I ended up getting really sick whenever I was in high school. I had an infection that attacked my immune system, and I have an autoimmune disease, so it ruled me out. And so that broke my family. We were like, okay, well, we're going to spend this last year that we have, and we're going to make the best of it. And so we kind of just went that way. Like we settled on it, and we were like, okay, this is God's plan. So we just have to accept that. And I remember Coach Kent coming to us after we broke the news to the team, and he said, "Brandon, God's not done with you yet." And ever since that day, God has found a way to make miracles happen in my life. Obviously, you guys know that my dad is still here. Praise the Lord. Shortly after Coach Kent said that, we get a call from Medical City, and they said, "Brandon, we found you a new kidney. Brandon, we found you a new pancreas." And they're like, "We need you to come down here to Texas." So we get in the car, we go down there, and they're like, "Okay, we're going to make sure that like everything's clear in order to get transplanted, because this is the last transplant you'll ever be able to get in your life. So we want to make sure it's the right one." And so we get down there, and we're like, "Yes, his life is saved." Well, about, I would say 3 hours later, they call us, and they're like, "Hey, this kidney's no good. So we don't know what to tell you guys besides go back to Oklahoma, and that we're sorry for getting your hopes up." And that crushed us. I remember my mom dropping to her knees, just crying, begging for a miracle to happen. And I was a senior in high school, and I was like, I can't lose my dad. Like, please don't take my dad away from me. And then here comes Coach Kent, and he's like, "Brandon, God's not done with you yet." He said, "I've prayed every single day for you. I've dropped to my knees at the altar in the Minshew." And he was like, "God is going to save you. God has a plan for you." He came and spoke to me. My dad was transplanted on Thanksgiving Day of 2021. This was shortly, probably 3 days later after Coach Kent had said that. they give us a call in the early morning hours, and they're like, Brandon, this has never happened in America before. We found you the double kidney transplant, and you're going to live. So he was transplanted on Thanksgiving Day. He did one of the shortest recovery times in the ICU that the transplant surgeon has ever seen. And he went about 2.5 weeks ago, and they said that the kidney is amazing and that he is the healthiest he has ever been.
So when she's telling me this story, because we talked about this yesterday, I was just like, wow. It's awesome to be able to read these stories in the Bible, and we see how Jesus puts his hand out and he performs these miraculous miracles. But sometimes I think we forget that we say we serve the same God today, that God still has healing power today, that Jesus can touch us right where we are. Talk to us a little bit about your journey of faith, yours and your family, from at one point doctors telling you you got 1 year with your only father on the earth, to him sitting in the back of this chapel today listening to you talk about this story.
So this kind of goes back to my identity. I was really lost. And I think whenever you don't have a relationship with God, it's really easy to point fingers and be like, why are you doing this to me? How is this fair? Because when you don't have the relationship, you don't know the things that he can do for you or that he can offer you. And the thing was that, of course, we served to God and stuff, but we weren't super good about it. And so I think after that miracle happened in our life, whenever we came to SCU, we made that relationship with God, that completely flipped everything around. I think we live by the motto of love like Jesus, to do everything in his name, to honor God in everything that we do. And I think that is the saving grace of what has been able to keep my family together. Without him, none of us would be here. And especially without him, I know that my dad wouldn't be sitting in the back row being able to listen to me give his story today. And so I think that really was an eye-opener of changing my family around and us being able to forever have that trust in the God that we serve, that no matter what, he's going to take care of us. To know God is to know peace. So
That's so good. There's two things I think that's important to note in our lives, and that is when you think about a seed and the potential of that seed, there are two things that speak to the potential. One is what's on the inside of the seed. The second is the size of the pot that it's planted in. So if you plant the seed of an oak tree in a small pot, it's always going to be confined to that. And so what I'm speaking about is the environment. So my question for you is, how important was it for your family to be around someone like Coach Kent, whose faith in God was so strong that it bled into the faith of your own family?
So I saw this, I think it was one of my teammates, we talked about this in devotion, that there's a healing story in the Bible, and the reason that he was healed was because of the people that he surrounded himself with. And so I think that having a positive environment that's going to encourage you to walk with God and to give you that support that you need when sometimes things get hard, I think that is super vital. Not only is God always going to be there for you whenever you're running from him, not only is he going to be there to forgive you no matter what you've done, but the people around you are going to be there to do that too. I think it is so important. Me and Josh were talking yesterday, and it was actually Kenny that asked me this. He said, well, what are some ways that you do, like, that you kind of, I guess, spread. Yeah, he live it out. And I told him, I was like, you have to love like Jesus did. And I said, you have to spread his word. And the thing is to love others the way that he would want you to love them. And so I think it is super important to have a Christ-like image and surround yourself with that. Because the things that it can do for you is truly amazing.
Yeah, one of the things also that we talked about yesterday, I think it's really important to understand this, is that even in the times that we have faith for something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out the way that we think it's going to work out. And I think everyone in this room could probably attest to that in some way, because I remember in 2014, I was praying every day that God would save my grandpa, and my grandpa passed away that same year. And one of the things that we talked about yesterday is that faith isn't necessarily only to change your situation. Your faith is to change you. Faith changes your response. It changes the way that you see things. And so what we talked about was trust. And you told me that the way that you trust God is so much different now. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding, which is important because the way we understand things sometimes is very limited. But in all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. So how has the way that you've trusted God changed throughout the years?
So I went from not having a relationship, not trusting him at all, to giving all my burdens to him. I never feel like a weight is too heavy on my shoulders because I know that no matter the circumstances, he's going to take care of me. One of my favorite things ever is Jesus never promised a trial-free life, but he did promise victory. And that is one of my most favorite things. It doesn't matter what the circumstance is. If somebody told me that I was going to die tomorrow, if that's God's plan, that's his plan. Josh said something really good yesterday that it doesn't matter what we can see visually here. It's about what he can see from up there. And that is something that I think is super vital whenever you put the trust in God. And there's nothing that's too deep whenever you follow him, whenever you give all your graciousness to him. There's nothing too deep that he can't handle, that he can't do for you. You'll always be taken care of. And so I think it is super important to trust in him because no matter what, you're going to be taken care of.
That's good. You talked earlier, we're going to circle back. You talked earlier about your identity when you were in high school. There's 85% of us are athletes here. Even if you're not an athlete, I think it's easy for us to find ourselves identifying with the things that we do, whether it's our job or whether it's the sport that we play, our passions. How important was that for you? So being a young girl who identified solely as a softball player to now your identity resting in Christ. What has that transition looked like for you? And why is that important?
So I think it's easy to get caught up and lost in what you're labeled by your peers, especially when you have a lot of stuff, because college isn't easy. Being an athlete isn't easy. You feel like you can't fail, but the sports that we play are something that's made of failure. One thing that stood out to me whenever we were talking yesterday was that when others saw Sarah as a barren woman, God saw the mother of all nations. When others saw David as a poor shepherd, God saw a mighty kind. Others may not see you, but God sees you. And that's something that's super important. Though sometimes you can't see the true identity of the Christ-like that God put on you, it doesn't mean that he doesn't see you that way. And so it's easy to get caught up and lost. But I think the transition was something that was super hard for me because I was in an identity crisis and I didn't have that firm foundation that I needed. But once I got that firm foundation, I was able to look myself in the mirror through all my hard struggles and know that no matter what, I was Christ-like. And so I think that to see ourselves the way Christ wants us to be seen, it's super important. And yeah.
How do you think we do that? So how are we able to see ourselves the way that Christ sees us? I think he gives us some insight into what he thinks about us. But from your perspective as a college student, what are some of the ways that you're like, this is how I know what God thinks about me?
So I think a lot of it goes back to treating people the way that he would want to treat. I think reading the Bible and being able to form that relationship with him is super important. Getting to learn the ways and getting that insight that Josh is talking about. This goes back to love like Jesus. To honor God and be able to share that image among people. I think that that is super important, and yeah, it's kind of
So I told Jess this is going to be the final question of the day. So my question to you is, why would you recommend Jesus? Why would you recommend Jesus to all these people who are listening to you today?
So he told me to work really hard on this, and now I'm kind of nervous. So going back to the Jesus never promised a trial-free life, but he did promise victory. That is so important. And Josh kind of hit on it earlier that God might not change the situation, but he will change you. And I think that that is so important. Whenever God never doesn't leave prayers unanswered. And I think that sometimes people get that super mixed up. And there is nothing that you can't handle whenever you establish a relationship with God. There's no form of judgment that he puts on us, which is one of the greatest blessings that we can be provided with. And I think that that alone is the biggest reason to want to have a relationship with Jesus. The weight that it can lift off your shoulders, the depression that it can take away from you, the anxiety that it can take away from you, the burdens, the guilt, everything that you can imagine, not having to live with that and being able to know that he's going to take it away no matter what, without a doubt, that is one of the biggest reasons that I think having a relationship with Christ is so important. Once again, to know Jesus is to know peace. Whenever you know Jesus, you're going to have peace in your life. Whenever you don't know Jesus is whenever you're not going to have peace in your life. And I think that is super important. So, yeah.
Y'all give it up for Miss Jess Moralez.